So my UX UI design skills are pretty limited, and that matters now because I'm responsible for designing stuff at my startup. UX stands for user experience. This is a user experience, and so is this, and this is a user experience. If it can be experienced and it can be designed, it's UX. UI, on the other hand, stands for user interface. Certain experiences need to be directly controlled, like these oven knobs, or these beautiful dials, or this super convenient foot-activated light switch. About 2 months ago, me and a friend got together and launched a note-taking platform, and the user experience is kind of clunky. To give you some background, the platform is designed to visually break down really complicated concepts by creating clickable shapes. And this creates a whole architecture of notes that are really easy to navigate. I'm going to be using the platform in its current clunky state to learn as much as I can about UX and UI design. And then I'm going to use all my newfound knowledge to design a whole new user experience. And so this is day number 1. Let's get started. So today was a pretty long day. If you haven't been able to tell, I've recently moved, so all of my study breaks have been just unpacking. But I got about 5 to 6 hours of focused work in, and this is what I did. Number 1, I found good sources of information. I usually go to forums like Reddit to see what the community recommends. This isn't absolutely foolproof, so you have to use your better judgment, but it's a great way to find great resources really fast. Number 2, I use ChatGPT and Bard to give me a head start. In the past year, I've been using them really often to break down concepts for me. Sometimes I'm not even sure what to Google, so whenever I use a prompt like, hey, I don't know much about this topic, can you give me all the key terms and concepts I need to understand as a beginner, as an intermediate, or advanced practitioner, it's just a really, really nice head start. It gives me a lot of context. Number 3, I filled in my gaps and confusions. So from all of the reputable sources that I found and YouTube, and by the way, there is a lot of UX and UI content out there, which is really nice. I was able to fill in anything that I was confused about. And at this point, I haven't taken any detailed notes as I just want to figure out what the big picture is. And this is the point at which I started to feel the depth of a lot of topics. I started to see all the things that I knew that I didn't fully get. But this is a good thing. If you don't know about the Dunning-Kruger effect, it's basically when at the beginning of a topic, you think that you know a lot. You're basically overconfident. And as you start to learn stuff, your confidence goes down as you start to see the depth of stuff. You go into the valley of despair for a while. And as you start to get genuine knowledge and become an actual expert, your confidence starts to come back up. But it never comes fully back up to the original naive state because now you can fully appreciate and respect what it means to be an actual expert. If you start to feel discomfort when you learn something new, take that as a good sign. It's a part of the journey. With all of that, here is my mental model of UX and UI design from today. So UX UI design is basically how a user experience is created and managed. UI design is focused more on the actual interface itself. I think everyone at the very beginning of UI design thinks that it's really easy because it's hard to really notice if you don't have trained eyes for it. But when the UX design of something is bad, we immediately take notice. So these are some unique volume control UIs. They're interesting to say the least. I think they're beautiful. Please make a noise as loud as you want the volume to be. Great design is absolutely everywhere, from like doorknobs to the way that lamps work to oven knobs. Everything is designed in a very specific way to make it easy for us to use. And good UX design isn't only about great design principles either, it's also about how you test it. There are many ways to test it and a lot of different methodologies, and that's something that I realize I seriously have a gap in, but I'm going to be diving into that tomorrow. Okay, so jumping into good design principles here. So good design principles are designed to make a user's experience as effective as possible. I split it into frameworks, which are basically the different principles and considerations. What do I basically have to consider when I design something? And across the board, regardless of product, there are some common principles that designers have discovered again and again to be pretty important. So here we have purpose and hierarchy, usability, which is closely tied to accessibility because you want as many people to be able to use your product as possible. There's control and ease, consistency, simplicity, and feedback. I can't go over every one of the principles today, but I'm just going to talk about 2. So jumping into hierarchy. So hierarchy is this. The order of importance should be clear and reflect the way the elements are presented. So in the example here, we have an article. The title is in small font, the content is in giant font, and it just causes me mental strain because it's just not what I expect it to look like. It doesn't have the visual hierarchy I expect. And here's how that can be fixed. The first element that people generally look for is in nice, bold, large font at the top, which is the title here. And underneath that is the author, where we expect it to be. And underneath that is the content. And this just makes sense. So going back up and then down into feedback. So I've kind of always understood hierarchy. It's kind of one of the more obvious principles, but feedback is one of my favorite principles because it can be really subtle sometimes. Hey, it's me, I'm editing, just wanted to point one thing out. So the notes that you see here for feedback are way more like the notes I take on a day-to-day basis. If I'm presenting stuff to other people, obviously I want that to be really neat and nice, and it takes some effort to do that. But I think a lot of people think that notes need to be really aesthetic. They don't. If they work, they work. You want them to be organized, you want them to be clear, but they don't need to be super pretty. Feedback is just making sure that a user knows where they are and they don't ever feel lost at any point in the process. So for example, if I press a purchase button and the order goes through and I get an email and everything is confirmed, but nothing happens on the actual button itself, I didn't get that feedback that went through, and that makes me feel really uneasy. But if the button turns green and it suddenly says purchase confirmed, then it's like, oh, okay, it went through, we're good, and I feel safe. These are just like the small things that really affect people. So going back up, I just wanted to touch on some of the many tools that UX designers have in their toolbox that are pretty critical to designing good UX. So we have things like information architecture, which is basically how information is architected and organized in a way that makes sense to users. There's typography. There's just so much in typography because when it comes to readability, the way you want to be perceived, there's just so many intricacies and ways to kind of control that. There's brand style guide, which is a way to keep all of your stuff consistent and keep your branding on point. And there's grids, and there's a lot more. These are just some of the tools that people use. So this is the end of day one. I'll see you tomorrow morning. Good morning. So I've spent the first couple hours of today finding methods of prioritizing which UX stuff to work on. As a founder, I'm pretty limited on time, so I want to have the biggest effect possible within a given time frame. And to do that, I gotta figure out what has the biggest impact on my users. So there's a group called Nielsen Norman, and they're a group focused on UX design and education. And they have an excellent article called When to Use Which User Experience Research Method. And after going through the article, I decided to do contextual inquiry, which is basically me sitting down and talking to my users. Now, at this current time, I don't have time to set up interviews, but I've already done that in the past and I have really detailed notes. So I'm going to be using that along with emails that I've gotten from users to figure out what to work on. And the other thing I'm going to be doing is using another article by the Nielsen Norman Group called 10 Usability Heuristics for User Interface Design to test the current existing interface myself to see what bottlenecks and issues it has that I can discover. I'm obviously not sponsored by Nielsen Norman, not that anybody would think that I am, but I do think their content is high quality and I highly recommend it. So now that I've decided how I want to prioritize which UX stuff to work on, I'm going to go through that stuff and figure that out. So I'll see you in a couple hours. So before I tell you about all of our UX problems, you have to deeply get what Palace Notes is. So if you work with complicated information or projects, you quickly learn that that's not a linear process. As we learn things, our mental model expands in every direction, and I wanted to be able to do that on a tablet. Instead of the classic page-by-page approach, you can draw connections on a given page that connect you to multiple others. I can draw connections on diagrams and mind maps, and suddenly a really complicated topic is very easy to navigate. I don't feel lost as I dive deep into every crevice of it. So to give you a real life example, one of our users is a nursing student and she sent in her notes, and this is what those look like. She's actually one of the people I regularly sit down with to understand how I can improve the app. So now that you have that background, these are the things that I'm going to focus on for the UX design. So number one, the information architecture is all over the place, and specifically at the point when you connect and stack nodes, which is really critical. So the concept of connecting nodes like this is slightly novel, and I want it to be really clear to people, so I also have to do a better job of educating people of how that works through the design. So number two, I've decided to ditch modes. Right now, you can switch between a couple of different modes, including view mode and edit mode, and that's been confusing people. So they'll go to draw while in view mode and be confused as to why that's not happening. I've noticed through multiple interviews and people try to use the app, this is something that they run into. So number 3, move stuff that's in the way out of the way. The toolbar you use to navigate through stacks is in the way, and the button and status message that lets you know which view mode you're in is also in the way. It kind of interacts with the title and it just overlaps. It just does not look good. And number 4, some people have complained that the menu for connection creation is not super visible and they can't really always tell that it's there. And so I definitely want to improve that as well. So all of this stuff in mind, I'm going to bed. I'm going to let it just marinate in my head. And tomorrow I'm going to create the new UX design. See you then. So now it's time for the super fun part of designing. So I'm using Figma, which I picked up a couple months ago to create logos and visual graphics. But before I even get to using Figma, I like to sketch things out on my tablet because I can't really think on a laptop. It's much easier for me to sketch something out, commit to it, and then commit to fully making it on Figma. I went to a couple places online to get UX and UI inspiration, and also learned about the huge number of different design trends and their pros and cons. So I'm gonna go through all of the iterations that I came up with and kind of my thought processes behind them. So let's go to design number 1. So this one is okay. I decided to go with the color green for whatever reason. I really like the color green, and I decided to go with glass morphism as the style. Now with glass morphism, there's a couple of things you have to worry about, mostly contrast. So if something is opaque and you put something behind it and suddenly the contrast between the buttons and its background aren't high enough for people to really see it very clearly, that's an issue. And it's actually an accessibility issue as well. If you're vision impaired and you can't see the buttons, that's a problem. There's a whole system behind creating a UI that has enough contrast. There are online calculators where you can pop in different hex codes for different colors and get a rating for how vision friendly your color palette is. Here, I don't think it's a huge issue because I blur a lot of the background and the opacity isn't super high, but that's just something I wanted to make sure to keep in mind for the design. That being said, I don't like it that much. There's a lot of issues with it that I already see, so let me show you version number 2. So this is version number 2. I decided to go with blue this time for whatever reason. I just consider that to be neutral for some reason. I don't think it is. I also looked up a bunch of beginner mistakes to make sure that I wasn't falling into any of the pitfalls. I tend to really like color and I want to use it in my design, but sometimes the boring UI that people don't even notice because it's just that smooth and out of the way is the better UI. So I wanted to make sure that I do that. That doesn't mean you have to be afraid of having any sort of style or doing things differently, but you have to balance very carefully between what is convention and the things that you put in. If you're too innovative, you're going to confuse people, but if you're too conventional, I guess you won't stick out as much, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. So this is design number 2. One of the things I noticed was the button hierarchy was lacking. And what I mean by that is the size, the shape, the style of different buttons signify certain information to people. So if they're big and on the page, like, okay, that's a main action. If they're off to one side and grouped together, you expect those buttons to have like a related meaning, things like that. And there's a little bit of that here, but not a whole lot. So let me show you the next version. This version also doesn't have button hierarchy. I think it's the one after this, but I went after a more neutral palette. This one's okay. I wasn't super crazy about it. But I did put borders, I think. Let's see. I did put borders. No, Figma, don't do that. Okay. I did put come on. So I did put no, I did not put borders. Never mind. Okay, let's keep going. Okay, so this is where I started to do things a little differently. For whatever reason, when I see the buttons attached to the side, it makes me feel comfortable. It was something interesting. I do use this later in my design, the attaching the buttons to the side. So let's keep going. Okay, so this was just garbage. I don't know why I made this a round button up here, but I did. We're gonna forget about this design. Okay, bye-bye. Okay, so this was my final design. I'm gonna show you a full-on mock-up because in Figma you can do mock-ups where you click on buttons and create animations and stuff. And I'm gonna show you a full mock-up of what that looks like. So here we can see that the button hierarchy, it makes a lot more sense. So on the left are 4 buttons in a row, and they all are larger and they take center stage. When somebody's using the page, that's probably the first things they're going to try. And so it just makes sense. And so now when I click on the no editing tool, the tools for editing like drawing and stuff pop up. They are a slightly smaller button, and the pencil button turns blue and the toolbar has a blue outline, so it kind of relates. So if I come in here and accidentally press it, I know kind of like why that's out. It just makes sense. And also the home and big picture view mode all the way on the top right are all the way on the top right, far away from all the other buttons, and they're kind of attached on the side. When I was designing this, I basically went to a bunch of drawing and note-taking apps to see what convention was in this industry and see what people kind of already expect. And these tabbed buttons that are attached to the side usually signify you going to something else completely. It's like a major change, maybe like in scene or to a completely different mode. So I thought it was appropriate to put them on the top right, and that feels pretty intuitive to me. So that's why those are there. And now you remember that the title and the view status, like the picture view mode, were kind of interacting. So I changed that up a good bit. Now the title is on the bottom. I think it looks pretty clean. And it's also static now. Before, the title would move with the note. And so if I was deeply zoomed in drawing something and I was like, oh crap, which note am I on? I wouldn't be able to tell. But now I can, because it's in a static place where you can see it basically at any time. And so now the view status only stays for a short amount of time. So now when I click into a different mode, the connections on pops up for a second and people know, oh, connections are on, and then it disappears and the button stays yellow to let people know that you're still in this mode. And then when I click on it again, it lets people know connections on and visualized, and that stuff is still there. So it makes sense. It's out of the way. It feels pretty clean. Then back to connections off, and that looks good. And that brings me to the last and most important thing that I was trying to resolve with this new UX and UI design, and that's education, specifically about the unique features that we have on this app that make it different, and that's connecting and stacking notes. So being able to connect different notes to the same page. And so I just straight up put an info button. Everybody knows about the info button. It's kind of across industries and across different apps. You click on it to kind of know what's going on. I feel like it's not subtle enough, but I couldn't think of a better way. And I think this provides the most clarity, which is important. So now when I press on this, a pop-up comes up with some exact instructions and explanations. I think this itself can be workshopped because people don't like reading a lot. They tend to just want to see a quick little infographic and know exactly what's going on. But this popping up and showing people, hey, the button's right next to here. This is exactly what they do, just to be clear. I think that's nice. I think that's clear. And this is the next iteration of Palace Notes. We have been blessed. Would you like to say anything? So those are all of the UX and UI design changes that we want to implement into Palace Notes. If you want to learn really complicated things really fast, like I did over the last couple of days, you should get Palace Notes for your iPad. These changes that you're seeing on the mockup right now probably are not going to be present for another week. But as you can tell, we're constantly improving the app and really care about making really complicated things very easy to understand. You can check us out with the link in the description, or you can type it in yourself if you want, palacenotes.com. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope this inspires you to learn something new or try something out or create something cool. See ya.